Your letter mightily pleased me, to a wonderful degree did your letter please me. Me exceedingly did your letter please me. By your letter I was mightily pleased. I was exceeding pleased by your letter. Your epistle exhilarated me intensely. I was intensely exhilarated by your epistle. As your brief note refreshed my spirits in no small measure, I was in no small measure refreshed in the spirit by your gracious hand. From your affectionate letter I received unbelievable pleasure. Your affectionate letter brought me an unbelievable amount of pleasure, and your pages engendered me within an unfamiliar delight. I conceived a wonderful delight from your pages. Your lines conveyed to me the greatest of joy, and the greatest of joy was brought to me by your lines. We derived great delight from your excellently kind of letter, and from my dear Faustus' letter I derive so much delight. In these Faustine letters I found a wonderful kind of delectation. At your words of delight of no ordinary kind came over me. I was singularly delighted by your epistle. To be sure, your letter delighted my spirits. Your brief missive flooded me with an inexpressible joy, and as a result of your letter I was suffused with an unfamiliar gladness. Over communication poured vitals of joy over my head, as your epistle afforded me with no small delight, and the pursuer of your letter charmed my mind with that of a singular delight. Your epistle was delightful to a degree, as your beautiful notes that you gave me affects me with the most extraordinary of extraordinary gladness, and as a result of your letter I was affected with a singular gladness, as your epistle was of the greatest of joys, beyond that of the joys, as your missive was that of the very well great delight, as your epistle was incredible of joy to me. How exceedingly agreeable did we find your epistle. You could scarce credit with the relief that I have just found your missive, as your epistle was that of us one of the greatest of delightfulness, as your letter was that of very sweet to me. Your spirits was the resource of the most singular gladness, as your spiritual letter madam positively jumped for joy. Your letter having arrived, I was transported with joy. When your letter had been delivered, I was filled with delight, and on the receipt of your letter an incredible delight seized my spirits. Once I had reread your affectionate letter, I was carried away with a strange happiness, as your epistle of pure spiritual writing poured a balm of happiness over me, and your writing, which was so beyond spiritual of the spiritual to me, was the most delightful thing possible. The fact that you had written to me was extremely pleasurable to me, and you honouring me with your letter was the most that of the agreeable of every single possible occurrences, as your brief note made me positively burst with that of the greatest joy, and how overjoyed I was just by you communicating and acknowledging me, as I was both pleased and delighted that you communicated me by your letters, and when your letter had arrived, you could have scarce credit you have seen me jumping for all the joy I felt. That you paid your respect by that of your letter was surely a satisfaction to me, and nothing more wished for me than that of your letter could have been on growth for me, and your letter has reached to us, and eagerly could have looked the risk it was. Nothing more desired than your letter could have been brought us, not unpleasing that was your epistle at home, and by no means displeasing your letter has arrived. Your missive by no means failed of a welcome, and your epistle was to me one of the sweetest beyond any words that you could possibly think of. As I read and reread your letter with great pleasure, I was not without the greatest of pleasure that when I received that of your spiritualness and friendship in hand, as the man who delivered your spiritualness conveyed that of the wealth of the joy, and the wonderful to relate how your letter enchants me, and these pages which I received from you sent a new light of spiritualness beyond that of that word of joy stealing over in every aspect of my heart, as your letter promptly expelled all sorrow from my mind, as I sensed the wonderful happiness and spirits when your letter was handed to me, and your letter was an accustomed happiness swept over my spirits, and your letter caused me to rejoice to the full, and because of that of your spiritual letter my whole self exulted with joy. It is difficult to say how much happiness was occasioned in me by your letter. I can difficult say how much happiness was occasioned by that of your internal spiritualness, and I could hardly find the words to express to an extent of the joy to which your epistle gave rise. It is wonderful to tell what ray of delight it had been forth from that of your spiritual friendship, and good God, what almighty joy proceeded from that of your epistle, and heavens, and the cause of the joy did your letter provide, and ye gods, and what power of joy did your missive supply, and a happiness occasioned by your communication great than I can describe, and your messenger brought me a great deal of pleasure, and you could scarce credit of the load of happiness your letter conveyed to that of my mind, as I cannot find a word to tell the joys that your letter has loaded upon me, and your letter heaps me with joy upon me. I rejoiced greatly at that of your epistle, and I found a singular pleasure within your letter, as your missive showered a wealth of gladness all upon every single aspect of my mind and my soul. At the sight of your spiritual letter and your friendship, the frown fled from my mind's brow.